morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about duty upper receivers, if you will. How much do they cost and what are they? But before we get into the video, if you want to help me out personally, you can, of course, like, share, and subscribe, as that is all free and does help me out quite a bit. Also, go ahead and comment your favorite hard use / duty upper receiver in the comments down below. Now, before we get going too far in the video, full disclosure on the upper receiver that I'm going to be showing off and referencing throughout the video. I believe I actually have a relationship with the manufacturer of every single component on this upper receiver. However, this upper receiver specifically doesn't really matter. We're really only going to be referencing it as it pertains to quote-unquote duty upper receivers, part selection, and of course, cost. Now, getting into what is a duty grade upper receiver? This is going to be probably a very contentious topic, especially when it comes to different price categories and what have you. So we're kind of going to separate it out into kind of your basement tier. What is the minimum amount of money you could spend on a hard use / duty use upper receiver? And then of course we'll go into a little bit higher echelons as well, where of course you can spend thousands of dollars on your upper receiver and justify yourself in the comments section. Now, getting into our reference upper receiver, this build actually came about by accident. So I was building a custom upper receiver for a gentleman and he wanted the 13.5-inch Geisley Mark 8 rail in FDE. I accidentally ordered the 15-inch version, so I of course had to order the correct length for the gentleman, and I was left with a 15-inch Geisley rail. That's a pretty decent rail, and so I thought, well, I should probably make an upper receiver around it, and that's kind of how this whole build idea came around. So the base of the upper receiver is this Geisley Mark 8 15-inch rail. The barrel is a FN chrome lined 16-inch mid-length gas. Now, this one here is not one of their cold hammer forged barrels. This is just a button rifled barrel, so it's not going to be quite as durable and have the same longevity as a cold hammer forged barrel is, but it's still an incredibly high quality barrel. Now, the upper receiver, this is just a FDE upper receiver from Aero Precision. I think I spent like $60 on it or something like that. The BCG is a Toolcraft nickel boron BCG. And that's kind of the basic rundown of the build itself. The gas block is dimpled and pinned in place by me personally. So again, for the build, we have a very decent rail, a very expensive rail as well, a very high quality barrel, which pretty much no one is going to argue that it's not a duty grade barrel. Toolcraft nickel boron BCG, which some people aren't a fan of, but I personally am, and that's kind of my deal. Now, this build retail, if you wanted to build this exact upper receiver, would cost you about $800. And $800 for a duty grade upper receiver is not terribly expensive. That's going to put you right in the same ballpark as kind of like BCM, and then a little bit under Daniel Defense, Radian, Geisley, and some others that are going to start at that $1,000 plus $1,200 mark. So as far as this upper receiver goes, it's not particularly expensive, but it's also not the cheapest on the market. So if we're going to get into what is the least amount of money you could spend and still get a quote-unquote hard use or duty grade upper receiver, let's start with the barrel. Now, the barrel on this FN 16-inch mid-length barrels are a bit of a conundrum because a lot of them are made or rebranded from other companies using contract manufacturing by companies like Ballistic Advantage or Roscoe. Now, Ballistic Advantage and Roscoe barrels both start generally at about $120 to $150, and then they'll go on sale for around $100 for their kind of base level barrels, the Bloodline barrels, and then of course the Performance series or the Classic series from Ballistic Advantage. Those are going to start at around that $120, $150 price range and then go on sale for around $100, again, retail price. Now, those barrels, some people will like and some people won't. However, it's pretty inarguable that there are a lot of those barrels floating around in very high quality upper receivers. A lot of companies are just taking those barrels and rebranding them as something special and then charging you double or triple for those barrels. So for me personally, for entry-level barrels, it's going to be Ballistic Advantage or Roscoe. Now, Faxon is kind of in that same realm, if you will. I'm not personally as big of a fan of Faxon barrels, although I have much less experience with them. I know a lot of you guys are big fans of their super lightweight profiles. Again, not really my thing, but it's going to be in that same ballpark. So really, it's going to be Ballistic Advantage, Roscoe, or Faxon. It's going to give you a very high level of quality while still being fairly inexpensive. It's going to be fairly well gassed, fairly accurate, fairly durable as well. You're definitely going to be getting on their, again, their standard 4150 barrels. You should be getting somewhere between 10 and 20,000 rounds of barrel life out of them. And again, they're going to provide you 99% of the features that you're going to get out of higher quality barrels. And now really what you're going to be missing out on more budget barrels versus like super high-end barrels is perhaps just some higher quality coatings, chrome linings, that sort of thing, higher quality manufacturing processes, cold hammer forged, different riflings, maybe a little bit more durable barrel as well, and perhaps a little bit more accurate, again, depending on which barrel we're comparing them against. So again, you can get a little bit more performance by spending a lot more money, but again, that performance to dollar ratio is going to take a nosedive. Not again that nice barrels aren't nice and aren't needed in certain applications, but again, for a general purpose gun, even a very hard use gun, you really can't go wrong with Ballistic Advantage or Roscoe. Now, the second most important component that we need to talk about is going to be your bolt carrier group. Now, bolt carrier groups are again another area where some people think that you need to spend hundreds of dollars on your bolt carrier group to get one of sufficient quality. Personally, I don't believe that is the case whatsoever. So currently, as of this moment in time, I can get AO Precision contract overrun BCGs, like legitimate contract overrun BCGs that are currently serving in our US military's M4s. I can get those for $70. Now, the retail on those is going to be between $100 and $120, but for me personally, again, as I have access to dealer pricing on their stuff, I can get their legitimate contract overrun BCGs for $70. And again, they're pretty inarguably duty grade and duty proven components, and again, they don't cost all that much. Now, they're pretty basic BCGs. They're just going to be a standard phosphate chrome BCG. Carpenter 158 bolt, which is again the true mil spec, 8620 carrier, 4140 key with true grade 8 fasteners. Again, nothing particularly special about them, but they are going to give you a very good level of performance. Now, again, so if you're looking for what is the cheapest BCG that you can get that's going to give you kind of that duty grade performance, I would say go out and pick up an AO Precision Phosphate Chrome, especially if you can get one of their true contract overrun BCGs versus just their standard retail BCGs. Even if it's a little bit more expensive, I would still recommend picking up the contract overrun BCGs, as that is a true duty grade component. Now, you can always, again, spend more on BCGs, like this is a Toolcraft nickel boron BCG, which is even more of a basic BCG, if you will. So instead of a Carpenter 158 bolt, it has a 9310 bolt, which is stronger. However, stronger is not necessarily the most important thing when it comes to bolts and lasting a extended period of time. So most of the time when somebody's telling you that 9310 is stronger than Carpenter 158, they're probably trying to sell you something, and that's probably something that I've said in the past as well. There is a reason why Carpenter 158 is the mil spec versus 9310. 9310 is a lot cheaper. Now, this specific nickel boron BCG I think retails for about $130. Now, you can spend a ton of money on specialized coating BCGs, $200-300 on certain BCGs. And are you really getting that much more performance? Well, you are definitely getting a nicer, harder coating. For instance, titanium nitride, nickel boron are both very hard and very lubricious. Titanium nitride is a little bit harder than nickel boron. However, just a standard phosphate chrome BCG will serve you very well. And you can even spend several $100s on just a phosphate chrome BCG. I want to say Daniel Defense charges like $200+ for some of their just standard phosphate chrome BCGs. Hopefully you're getting a higher level of QC and materials, but even that's kind of a crapshoot unless you're looking at heat sheets for every individual component on the BCG, which most of us probably aren't. Now, getting into the actual upper receiver component itself very briefly, because I can't be bothered to argue about it, it matters so little that it almost doesn't matter whatsoever. If you're worried about a cheaper upper receiver, just grab an Aero Precision and you'll be just fine. I've dealt with a ton of them from Anderson, Aero, and many other brands as well. And I have had so few issues, so few and far between that, again, it matters, but it almost doesn't matter at all. Now, getting into rail selection, this is, of course, the Geisley 15-inch Mark 8 rail, which the Mark 8 is basically a machine-down quad rail. For instance, this in the Mark 4. The Mark 4 has Picatinny sections at the end, and then it's slimmed down in the middle. The Mark 8 is just completely slimmed down, but they both basically start life as a quad rail. Now, depending on if you're planning on mounting a zeroable device at the end of your rail, it could or could not matter all that much. So if you are planning on mounting, again, anything zeroable on the end of your device and you need it to maintain zero, then it is very important for you, one, to have a very strong rail that won't bend or deform on its own, and also a very strong lockup, because of course you're going to want as stable of a mounting platform as possible, especially when, again, you need something to retain zero. Now, on the Geisley Mark 8 rails, they do have a very good lockup, so you have two Huge crossbows set to 8 foot-pounds, so 96 inch-pounds is how that works out. Dogleg nut on the other side. On top of that, they have a very, very tight fit between the barrel nut and the handguard, like a very tight fit. Usually you need to kind of hit it on with a rubber mallet. And then on top of that, they have a set screw on either side that you then torque down onto your upper receiver, so it makes direct contact with your upper receiver. Now, you can always find thinner, lighter rails on the market, which this Geisley Mark 8 is neither of those things. But again, don't expect them to be the most structurally sound things on the market. Now, on the flip side of that, I'm a big fan of quad rails because quad rails will almost never bend or deform under any circumstances whatsoever. However, depending on their lockup, even though the rail itself might not shift or bend or whatnot, it can actually shift on the barrel nut itself, which will of course cause you to lose zero. Now, if you watched a video I did a while ago on the AT3 receiver set, which is a very cheap quad rail receiver with just a very basic clamp. Now, I dropped that from like 30 or 40 feet several times onto rocks, and you guys see me do terrible things to that rail. And the rail itself never shifted or deformed, but because the lockup system on the barrel nut was pretty poor or substandard, the rail itself, the whole rail actually shifted a degree or two to the left, which would of course cause you to lose zero. When it comes to rail recommendations, I don't really have a specific budget rail to recommend. That, again, if you are going to be putting a couple $1,000s at the end of your handguard, you're probably going to want to spend the money and get a rail of sufficient quality and strength. And you are probably going to have to look for a rail that is not the thinnest or lightest on the market, because again, at the end of the day, this is just a long piece of extruded aluminum and not particularly strong. Now, if you're not planning on mounting a laser aiming module or what have you at the end of your rail, then again, it really doesn't matter, and you could even go with something super simple like the Plastic Fantastic Aero Precision behind me and just use like an A2 front sight post or something like that, and you'll be good to go, provided, again, you don't want to mount some sort of zeroable device at the end of your handguard. So now with all of that out of the way, what that brings us to is a barrel of sufficient quality, either again a Roscoe Ballistic Advantage, something like that. A barrel of sufficient quality, going to be very reliable, going to be accurate enough for 99% of circumstances, going to be well gassed enough for, again, most general purpose roles. A true mil-spec BCG, an upper receiver of your choice, mil-spec charging handle, gas block, gas tube, again, of sufficient quality, A2 flash hider, a rail of your choice. And all of that is coming together at around a price tag of $400 to $450 for, again, kind of the bare minimum entry level of a hard use or duty grade upper receiver. Now, if you wanted to throw in some sort of laser aiming module or some sort of very expensive zeroable device on the end of your rail, you're probably going to take that price tag up to about $600 to $650. And again, remember that this reference build here is about $800. Now, at this price point, you're kind of getting into that mid-range of where it's going to be basically directly competing with BCM, which BCMs are going to start at around that $800 to $1,000 mark. And then after you get past $1,000, now you're looking at Geisley, Radian, a few others as well. And then you can get into the Daniel Defense, so on and so forth. And then you get into some of the more top-tier LMTs and CACs and what have you, which are going to go for multiple thousands of dollars usually. Now, a lot of the problems that arise from a lower tier build, if you will, aren't really necessarily from the components themselves, as they kind of just are of an acceptable level of quality. A lot of it has to come down to the assembly, especially if you are building these yourselves, which again, for that, if you're trying to save as much money as possible, you are going to be assembling a lot of the stuff yourself, which a lot of the problems can arise from that just in and of itself. And of course, also you are going to have a little bit higher of a QC tolerance than on more expensive factory guns. Like if you buy a factory Geisley upper that is, manufactured by a professional, test fired, a lot of those issues, if there were any to be found, will be found before that gun ever leaves the factory, versus you assembling it from a box of components. So you definitely can put together a very high quality, very accurate, very reliable upper receiver for somewhere between, again, like $400 and $600 is kind of that very entry level for a hard use upper receiver. You definitely can do it. It is going to take a bit of work on your part, especially because you're probably going to be the one assembling it. You're going to have to do smart shopping, buy things on sale, so on and so forth. And again, for my audience personally, we are focused, no pun intended, on a little bit more of the budget or cheaper or poor side of things, whatever you guys want to call it. So we'll cut some corners here and there and save a little bit of money. That being said, though, for most people, if you're just looking for something that works right out of the box, I still probably recommend just going with something like a BCM, somewhere in that price category, maybe even an Aero Precision if you want to save a little bit more money, and just get a factory upper receiver that is going to work, is using very high quality components, or at least components of an acceptable level of quality, and it's going to serve you well. Now, of course, component selection is very important. You do want to make sure that you're getting an acceptable level of quality out of everything that you're buying, that it's matching your needs for your specific upper receiver and your specific circumstances. Because again, these are very individualized. These are basically adult Legos, if you will. And so you want to make sure whatever it is that you're building, whatever it is that you're even just buying factory, is going to accomplish the task that you have for it. Now, at the end of the day, of course, while component selection is, again, very important, the end user is the most importantest. So, with all that out of the way, guys, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Leave your thoughts, comments, and concerns, of course. But with all that out of the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.